Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. I came across my first dead body the other day. This experience was surreal, to say the least. What's yours? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I saw my first dead body my sophomore year in high school, and it was my friend. My sisters were still in middle school, and my mom would drop them off in the morning before driving me to the high school and sending me on my way. We were one of the last cars allowed into the parking lot of the middle school, and all I remember seeing was an old teacher of mine with a very sullen look on his face and a giant yellow piece of construction paper. To this day, I don't know how I missed or didn't comprehend seeing Sean's body there. Next thing I know, I'm in first period, and his best friend comes running into my room asking me if I've seen Sean. I tell him no, and he runs out. Later I learned that Sean's parents had called him to inquire if he had spent the night, as he had not returned home the previous night. Rumors spread at school, and we don't know what's going on, but I don't think of this morning's scene. Finally, we received confirmation that they had recovered Sean's body in the middle school yard across the street from our high school. Suddenly, memories from this morning begin to flood back to me. Son, we were one of the last ones let into the lot because police started arriving on the scene and they needed to block off the area. The former teacher I saw out there was distraught because he discovered the body of a former student, and in an attempt to protect others, he placed the construction paper up. I saw Sean's body lying there, and I had no idea it was him. It still shakes me to this day to relive that moment when I realized what happened. But I found an odd comfort in that moment when we finally got confirmation of what actually happened. I was in Madison, Wisconsin in about 1996, boozing on University Ave with some of my buds. We were in the open party convenience store, stocking up on munchies and after-bar treats at about 1:30 a.m. Suddenly, a child ran into the store yelling loudly, "Call a fucking ambulance, a girl just fell," before scurrying back out. We ran out of the store, and right around the corner we saw a girl lying on her back. She had jumped or fallen from a long way up and had suffered serious injuries. She was twitching, and her head was bleeding profusely. She didn't seem to be breathing. We heard sirens coming fast, and 2 cops on foot came running from down the block to help. They quickly secured the scene and began interacting with her and trying to determine how seriously she was injured. Meanwhile, my friend and I felt anxious and helpless as we watched the young girl fade out right before our eyes, not really knowing what could even be done for someone who had suffered such a serious head injury, or where one would even start. We watched the scene for some time after this, sitting on a ledge, chatting quietly and soberly. The remaining police shined a laser pointer on the side of the building at the balcony many stories up and chatted amongst themselves. That girl's face was one I'll never forget, and that night was one that will stay with me forever, at least the end of it. I was never able to positively find out who the girl was or what really happened to her. Life can be such a fleeting thing. I mean, from my own experience, it's almost like a disconnect from yourself. Like you're there and you're present. In an emergency situation, this is different, I'm sure. But coming across one, I don't know, it felt like you were there in your body, but like you were watching yourself watch this experience. I'm sure it's different for everyone. And I'm sure plenty of you haven't. And I hope that you never have to, unless you want to. If you choose that field, or it just happens upon you one day. Anyway, hope you're all well. 2 kids discovered a body floating in the swimming pool at my friend's apartment complex, and I was the first adult on the scene. The kids approached us and said there's something in the pool. While we stood at a distance, where only the pool's edge was visible. My two friends were dismissive, but I broke into a run. To this day, I have no idea what gave me a clue, but I knew it was something serious. I jumped in the pool and flipped him over, and as soon as I saw his face, I thought he was dead and gone. But I remember first aid training from over a decade previous, and so I shook him and yelled to try to wake him. No luck. So I dragged him over to the steps to get him out of the pool. He was too big for me. But by this time, one of my friends had reached the side, and she helped me get him onto flat ground. She had told me she was a pre-med student, so I asked her to start CPR, since I figured her training was more recent than mine. Regrettably, this man drowned as a result of drinking, vomiting, and choking on his own vomit. The first time she experienced the unpleasant taste of his vomit, she ran away and started throwing up herself. I decided to take over. Another bystander stepped forth and told me she knew CPR, so I asked her to do the compressions and I steeled myself to do the rescue breathing. After several minutes, a policeman ran up with a first aid kit and he took over for us. Several minutes after that, an ambulance pulled straight across the lawn and up to the fence that enclosed the pool. The EMTs basically took one look at him and zipped him up in a bag. I was told that a body found floating has been beyond help for a while already. The police took my statement to rule out motives, and the next day I read in the paper that it was an accident. I'll never forget the first time looking in that man's eyes while we were still in the pool, but I'm not sure I could describe it fit to convey the profound impression of not alive. His entire body had turned either yellow or purple, and as I tried to force him to take breaths, I noticed how his tongue was yellow, but his taste buds were purple. His nose was yellow, but his pores were purple. His neck deepened from yellow to purple, and then there was a straight, stark line just above his armpits, where his skin turned from purple back to yellow. His fingers and toes were yellow, but the tone from under his nails was purple. I'll also never forget the hollow, sucking sound of the air I had breathed into him falling back out as I bent my ear to his mouth during my partner's compressions. Of course, I would continue to psychosomatically taste the heavy taste of vomit and alcohol in the back of my throat for weeks to come. The entire time this was going on, I was just acting. Even when I was telling people what to do, my ego sat in a theater in my skull, watching through my own eyes. It was quite strange to engage in a dialogue with my thoughts. Okay, that's good. That's probably the best thing to do given these circumstances. Oh, now she's throwing up. What should happen next? Oh, okay. I've already started helping her. I wonder how I'm doing all these things without consciously planning or thinking about them beforehand. I'm overjoyed. I'm doing the right things, since I'm not waiting to think about it first. And so on like that, as if my ego needed to reassure itself even in its own irrelevance. I don't think aside from the lingering taste thing and a few disturbing dreams that I had much in the way of long-term effects from the event. I got mad at the person for a little while, but in truth there have been many times where I was drinking and swimming alone too, and I certainly don't have a death wish. My other friend, not the one who vomited, called 911, but was too scared to touch the man. She likely endured the most difficult time among the three of us due to her disappointment at what she perceived as her cowardice. I tried very hard to console her by telling her that all of us knew he was dead just by looking at him, but I couldn't bear to stand around and do nothing. I've always wondered about the phenomenon of acting before thinking, while also thinking about the phenomenon of acting before thinking. I wish I could phrase it better, but after reading several of the other stories in this thread, I realize I'm not alone. I appreciate the opportunity to share this story with anyone who has read this far. I've only told it to a few people, and after they told me it gave them nightmares, I stopped talking about it. Indeed, it only affected a handful of people, and I was the one experiencing the most intense effects. I was going into New York City from Princeton Junction, New Jersey. Upon arriving at the station, we received instructions to move to the opposite side of the tracks. Suddenly, a train comes up going the opposite direction of New York, but were informed this was our train. We boarded and were a bit frustrated about going to Trenton and then New York, a 30-minute loss. The intercom told us that there had been a fatality on the tracks and they had to close it down. After waiting in Trenton, we started to head to New York City. I'm sitting next to the window, facing the northbound tracks. My sister sits next to me. While we're passing the Hamilton station, the train starts to slow down, and quite a bit. I looked out to the track below me. Initially, I noticed a ripped piece of denim, then blood. The cops stood around a covered body as they dragged indescribable bloody entrails and clothing along the rails. My hands were shaking at the sight, and I couldn't settle down for the rest of the day. It turns out that a guy jumped off of an overpass into an Amtrak train. I'm an RN, although I'm working in IT, so I don't have a ton of stories to tell. That said, the day I did my ER clinical, I was hit with a face full of death. During that one rotation, an old man came in after having fallen off of a ladder and onto his head. There was brain matter. An infant came in having aspirated inhaled liquid and died in its sleep. Another man came in having an MI, myocardial infarction, heart attack. I wore myself out doing chest compressions on him, and the doctor pumped him so full of epinephrine and bicarbonate, well, he did all he could. The man only briefly regained consciousness, giving him just enough time to say goodbye to his wife. The sad story here is not so much that he died, but that he was obese and had continued to live an unhealthy lifestyle, despite having had a heart attack about 1.5 months prior. In short, the death was likely preventable. Death is an odd thing, and it affects different personalities in different ways. I love and genuinely care about people, but it didn't ruin my day. I understood logically that it was supposed to impact me emotionally, but it didn't that day and never did after that. My teachers were all in a fuss, offering us counseling and asking if we needed anything. And I was wondering why I'd need counseling when I'm not the one that lost a father, child, or spouse. The car in front of us went up an embankment and rolled. Then a woman, driver, was ejected from the driver's window and hit the ground a couple of times. We were the car right behind her, coming home from a family vacation, and already some 8 hours indoor drive. I remember my dad behind the wheel swerving to avoid her van, my mom screaming like crazy, and my little brothers freaking out. I just stared. It was so wild to see this ragdoll body bouncing down the road. It didn't even look real. Once we had stopped, my dad and I jumped out. I was 16 at the time, and remember thinking, well, this is what an adult would do, and ran to the woman, but she was already dead. Still warm body, eyes open, mouth agape, and all these little cuts oozing. I saw that face in dreams for a long time after. We were there for a while, but since my little brothers are young, my mom backed the car up away from the scene, while Dad and I tried our best to do something, anything useful. I remember scooping her purse and some belongings up and putting them into the car, my dad turning off the ignition, and then a whole lot of speaking with the cops. After that, we went home, and in true family tradition, we never spoke of it again. A couple of months later, I saw a motorcyclist run over at a highway merge, and just this past year, I saw way more than my fair share in Central America. All sorts of drug violence, traffic accidents, and just stupid drunks down here. The later times don't make the same impression as the first, or at least Mine haven't. Might be because they weren't so visceral. Anyway, OP, I'm sure that wasn't what you wanted to see today, but if nothing else, it ought to impress a bit more the value of every moment you spend alive. Do something you love with someone you adore. Take care. A couple of years ago, I was driving with my then 4-year-old son somewhere one sunny Saturday. We were out running some errands and our route took us past Marley Station Mall near my house. There was an intersection and I pulled up to the stoplight and glanced to my left and saw across the median a man in a leather jacket and jeans, and he was on the ground about 20 feet from his motorcycle, which was up against the curb. The man was about 20 or 30 feet from me, just lying there, out the driver's side window. The man's head, I don't know how to describe this well. His head was slightly elongated. It was as if he had a head but no skull, and he had laid down to take a nap, and he rested his head on the street, and his head, being this soft thing, sort of flattened a little, like setting a bag of silicone on the pavement. It was egg-shaped but very, very soft. He faced away from me, his body bent at a strange angle. I immediately realized that the man had been riding without a helmet, and he had collided while making a left turn through the intersection, and I knew immediately that he was dead. The looks on the faces of the people standing on the sidewalk, either in shock or speaking animatedly into their cell phones, tended to confirm this. It had to have happened just a minute or so before I pulled up to the light. I'll never forget that moment, but I will certainly never forget what happened next. My son, who was seated in his car seat behind me, looked out the window and asked me in a matter-of-fact, "Daddy, is that man dead?" I quietly answered, "Yes, son, I think he is." The light turned green and I drove on. My son was quiet in the back seat, and I was suddenly struck, almost physically struck, with the knowledge that my son at age 4 had seen his first dead body, something that took me 20 years to see, and even then, only during a pre-med anatomy course in college. And the overwhelming sense of loss, this completely enveloping, massive, life-changing realization that my son had part of his innocence forever stripped from him. It was enough to make me pull off into a parking lot where I began to weep openly. It was the most intense and uncontrollable emotional release I've ever experienced. Totally bizarre. And my son didn't once ask me why I was crying, because he started crying too. He doesn't remember it. He doesn't recall it, at least not consciously. My first experience of the sight of a dead body was last spring. It was not a traumatic experience, but it was definitely surreal. In the art department at my school, one of the professors takes her drawing class to the medical college to draw from cadavers. They were bodies donated to science after death. Parkinson's disease victims, to be specific. I didn't take her class last semester, but I did the semester before, but we didn't get the chance to go because the medical students started late on dissecting the bodies. And so, she let me join in when her class actually did go. It was such an eerie feeling. I'll never forget the feeling of walking into the cadaver room and staring at 2 semi-shriveled, preserved bodies, skin dissected off and organs, muscles, tissue, etc. showing. It smelled like formaldehyde, and the teacher passed around Vaseline to put under our noses for the ones who could not stomach the stench. They allowed us to pick up body parts, gloves on of course, and move around what we had to in order to get the sketches we needed. The whole time I just thought to myself, I will be like this old man and old woman one day. Nothing but a body. No breath of life, no muscle movements, nothing. I will be nothing one day. It really did throw me a new perspective on life, and I've been pondering life and death ever since, whereas once before, I kind of shrugged death off. I'm lucky to say I did not have to experience my first dead body, other than in animals, of course, in a negative way, but with a more of a placid and thought-provoking experience. I first ran into a body while rowing in Lake Washington, just outside of the Cut by UW, if anyone knows. My coxswain had just had us weigh enough to come to a halt because our coach had just bumped into an object floating in the water. Bear in mind, this is approximately at 8 p.m., 4 days before Halloween. Needless to say, my coach was a little unnerved to see a human-shaped and sized object floating, wrapped in a huge fire blanket. I was called off of the rowing shell and brought up onto the coach's launch to help pull it out of the water. We thought it was just a blanket that had fallen into the water and was posing a threat to the boat traffic. Jokes were still being made about it being a body or some shit like that. I was more than taken aback when we started pulling it out of the water to find a very distinct human torso-shaped outline in the blanket and a horrible stench. At this point, my coach and I knew that we were into some weird shit. We kept pulling the blanket, and all of a sudden the body slid off the launch and started unraveling the blanket into the water. We tried, but we couldn't get the body to stay in the blanket or on the launch. At this point, we noticed a lot of mud and blood seeping out of the blanket and into the lake. Surprisingly, I was still completely fine. I guess my Spock side took over, and I just had the foresight to keep pulling the blanket up onto the launch to hand over to the cops. We hauled ass back to our docks and offloaded the rest of the team to go get changed and head back to the school. My coach, coxswain, and I stayed behind with the cops, Harbor Patrol, and the Coast Guard. The respective agencies showed up, and we gave our statements and helped the cops tow the blankets to the edge of the docks and load it into the Harbor Patrol boat. They instructed us to return home at this juncture, acknowledging our full contribution. The cops had deployed a helicopter and 2 dive teams to the location we described to search for the body. About a day later, they found human remains, including an intact waist-up torso and head. This was my first encounter with a deceased person. I'm still utterly fine, and I don't really feel any different, though my coxswain feels otherwise. Go figure. Definitely feels weird to type it all out, though. I was very young when I first saw a dead body, I think 15 to be exact. Anyway, I was on vacation with my parents in Key West, and I had decided to bring a friend along. My friend and I were really into fishing at the time, so one night we decided that we were going to wake up at 5 a.m. the next morning to snag some fish during what we thought was feeding time. So we went to bed early and woke up to our alarms, packed up all our fishing gear, and left for the pier with my little brother, who was 13 at the time. We get down to the pier and everything is great for 20 minutes because we caught a lot of fish. Out of nowhere, I get this strong tug on the line, and I get so excited. I start to reel it in, and it was a barracuda, but it gets off the line close to the edge of the pier. My friend looks out to see the size of it, and he notices a shirtless guy face down in the water. We think it's a guy snorkeling at first, but then he doesn't move at all and drifts right up to the pier's edge. We start screaming at him to try and get his attention, but nothing. And that's when I knew. My little brother just watches everything that's going on. So I tell him to go back to the room to not burn any bad memories into his head. So my friend and I call the police while the body still drifts along the pier and gets caught on a few branches. The police came and asked us if we were okay and even offered free counseling, though we denied. I can't say I still don't think about what happened to that guy and how he died. The following day, I received the Key West newspaper in which I was featured. The reporter discovered the man's name and discovered that he was a local homeless individual. I can definitely say I appreciate everything more because of this experience. I was shadowing a vascular surgeon last summer to get a taste of surgery as a career. In summary, I witnessed a woman who I had only met a few hours earlier succumb to a life-threatening injury right before my eyes. It was like a horror film. The aorta burst during endovascular surgery conducted by wires through the veins with no major incisions. and they had to cut open the abdomen in an emergency surgery. Chest compressions and organs flopping around, blood spraying everywhere and pooling on the floor, and that blood pressure monitor beeping. When they called for help, the woman was completely covered in blood, her chest and stomach cavity completely filled. The pool below her was huge, and the body was surrounded by bloody tools. Most people assisting were covered in blood. I went through the rest of the evening in something of a daze and was back at the hospital the next morning. It changes you, but it wasn't as drastic a change as I expected. I had no revelation, and I just went on living. That experience was something I wasn't expecting until medical school. A few years back, I was going to homecoming with a blind date and a few friends. I lived in Tokyo at the time, where we took the train everywhere, and so we all sat in the first car, jokes and light conversation abounding. My date was lovely enough, if not my type, but I was certainly having a fun evening. As we pulled into the station before our stop, the train jumped and jolted to a stop. A loud thud against the front of the train is the only sound I can remember, after which all I could see was a silent blur of images, mostly of me holding my date as she cried. It's a pretty common occurrence in Japan, but this was the first time that I'd ever experienced it personally. We patiently waited for more than 3 hours. While the tracks were cleared. It took me a week to get past the experience, although I don't think it really left my mind for a few months. Last year, I was riding on the train from New York to New Jersey when an announcement came on saying that we wouldn't stop at the next station. As we passed by, I could clearly see blood everywhere. They hadn't had a chance to really clean it up yet. I will never know the circumstances behind the event, but it reminded me of the night of homecoming, and suddenly the memories of it came rushing back, like it happened that day. But I didn't feel the same sadness. I felt bad for the person, bad for the event, but the first experience has changed me for the better. All I felt was a sense of serenity about death. This experience will stick with you forever. That's not a bad thing. I don't know if this helps you out at all. I wrote this as much for myself as for you.